Calliope's Tale by FalcomReynolds. Chapter 9. Daughter of the Goddesses. After that, Ianthe, though knowing of course that Baroni Hakir was perfectly safe, did not feel quite as welcome there as she had before. It was clear that Makulo and the others on the crew shared her reservations, and besides, she wanted to get back out to the open expanse of the sea, where she wasn't so far apart from Calliope. The mermaid, true to her word, had remained outside of the port the entire visit. Ianthe had been terrified, secretly, that when they left she would find that Calliope had left, and she would never see her charge again. To her immense relief, though, she spotted Calliope's dark shape under the water's surface only minutes after they'd cleared the delta waters and forged outwards towards the ocean. "Hi, welcome back to the ocean," Calliope shouted when she surfaced next to the midnight sun as the ship made her way through the water. The mermaid grinned, tossed her hair, so long, tightly curled and deep black, behind her. "Took you long enough." "Would have been longer," Ianthe sighed, and cut her own words short. Calliope didn't need to know what was going on with Alizarin. Ideally, she'd soon be too large to be easily killed. Maybe after that point it would be safe to tell her, but until then, no. It was better she not know. She was young, reckless, impetuous, thinking herself invincible. "But?" Calliope asked, tilting her head to the side. Ianthe shook her head. "But we decided to leave," she said, "and so now we go." For a moment, Ianthe thought she caught a flash of suspicion in Calliope's eyes. Did she know Ianthe was withholding information? She wasn't sure. The mermaid didn't seem to be inclined to push the matter any further, though. At least not for now. Instead, she nodded, adjusted her position, sweeping her hands through the water. "Where are we going next?" "North," Ianthe said. "Towards the equator. I'm not sure how far we'll go. Not all the way there, of course." "I want to go to the equator," Calliope grumbled, splashing water onto the side of the ship. "It seems neat." "Even I get sunburned that far north," Ianthe said, shaking her head. "You would likely suffer the same, though. Perhaps the water would shield you." Ianthe's skin was so dark it was nearly pure black, but in the past they'd strayed dangerously close to the brilliant band of sea and land that formed the equator, and that was where she'd gotten the worst sunburn she'd ever felt. She didn't normally burn, either, so it had been a novel experience. Makulo hadn't even dared to stay on the deck for more than a few minutes. Calliope's skin wasn't quite as dark as Ianthe's, but it was far thicker and tougher, almost rubbery and unnaturally good at healing. No doubt she was adapted to the constant glare of the sun, filtered as it may be through the water. "If our course takes us that way, we'll go," Ianthe said with a shrug. "We'll have to see." "Maybe we can find someone to get more tattoos," Calliope mused. "I'll tell Makulo to make it a priority." They set sail north for a port named Varilla, nestled deep in a cove on a rocky island. Calliope continued to grow as they went, spending most of her time in the water rather than on board the Midnight Sun, which was just as well because she was swiftly becoming too large to get on and off the ship easily. They had to haul her up in a lifeboat now. How are you getting enough to eat?" Ianthe asked her once, curious, leaning back into the lifeboat. They often let it down if the ship wasn't moving, so that Calliope could rest her elbows on the edge and threaten with a laugh to tip anybody inside into the water. It made chatting with her fairly easy, at least. "I catch fish and things," Calliope replied, with a shrug. "It's easy. They're not so fast once you stun them." "Stun them?" Calliope responded by opening her mouth and singing a note that Ianthe felt rather than heard, a high, barely audible tone that made her skull vibrate. For a few moments she just sat there. Then she shook her head to clear it and realized Calliope was floating in the water, grinning at her. "See?" she said, her dark eyes gleaming. "You do that to fish?" "Sometimes it just kills them. Then it's even easier to catch them, though it's not as fun." Nothing stopped them, so they kept going north, away from the more populated waters. The weather grew rougher, stormier, and more than once Ianthe had to call upon the great goddess of the sky not to rile the weather up, but to calm it. "How are you doing that?" Calliope asked her once, as she cut through the water alongside the ship while Ianthe stood on the bow. Ianthe felt the sparks of lightning crackle along her fingertips. "Doing this?" she asked, looking down at her hands. "Yes." "I'm channeling the goddess Galari, the eternal tempest, the queen of storms." Something that sounded almost insane, though it was anything but. "Yes, I know what it is you're doing, but I want to know how." That took a moment. Ianthe frowned. "My mother taught me how," she said after a long moment, turning her flickering eyes towards the horizon. She could feel the electricity running underneath her eyelids, across her face, leaving a faint pinch-like stinging in its wake. "It is a power I was born with, but I had to learn how to use it." Calliope paced the ship, her strong tail working smoothly in the water. She rolled onto her back and let the water soak her hair, floating over her thick shoulders in a soft, fluffy poof of jet black large enough to swirl behind her like a cloud of ink, halfway down her back. She took a breath and let it out, still keeping pace with the sun, and looked up at Ianthe. "Can you teach me?" "I don't know. I could try, I suppose. But you aren't related to me by blood." "Does that matter?" Ianthe paused, wondering, head tipped to the side. There was a long silence. Water lapped against the wood of the boat, gently whispering under the turning sky. Calliope watched her carefully, dark eyes with a faint hint of a shine in the back of them that caught the light when she tipped her head back just right. "I'm not sure," Ianthe said finally. She'd been taught by her mother, and her mother had been taught by her grandmother. She'd always thought that perhaps she would have a daughter to teach, but it didn't seem to be her fate. And she didn't mind, though she was worried that when she died, no one else in the world would know how to do it, and the art would be lost forever. She knew that she was one of the very few people who could still converse with a god, as if they were ordinary people, and that if she didn't pass on her magic, it could disappear into the past without a single ripple spreading to the future. But was it her job alone to save this by giving up her own life on the sea to have a child? It was a debate she had been having with herself for years, and one she'd not found an answer to. And while she had pondered the question, she'd sailed. If she could teach these same skills to Calliope... "I will try," she said, raising one hand and bringing a bolt of lightning down on the distant sea. "But I cannot guarantee your success." "That's fine," Calliope said with a shrug. "I'll do my best anyway." Ianthe nodded. "Very well."